A single voyage can sound like a neat chapter in a book, yet this one began as a question that felt reckless because it asked whether the known world was smaller than everyone believed and whether stubborn confidence could outweigh careful maps. What if the edge of the world was not a cliff at all, but merely a bend in imagination, waiting for someone impatient enough to test it with wood, canvas, and a crew that trusted the sea reluctantly? The paradox sat quietly at the center of this journey because safety depended on tradition, while discovery required ignoring it, and both could not win at the same time. As we step aboard together, notice how certainty and doubt share the same deck, whispering competing futures while the shoreline remains comfortably close. This voyage did not begin with storms or shouting, but with paperwork, promises, and long conversations where powerful people measured risk against reward. Even before the ship moved, tension existed between what rulers hoped to gain and what sailors feared to lose, and that tension shaped every decision ahead. The world of the 15th century felt large and mysterious because maps ended abruptly and rumors filled the blank spaces with monsters, gold, or endless water. Trade routes already connected continents, yet they moved slowly and indirectly, controlled by geography, politics, and those who guarded familiar paths. European kingdoms wanted faster access to wealth and goods, but their ambitions pressed against the limits of navigation and collective courage. Sailors understood currents and stars through experience rather than theory, which meant the ocean inspired respect mixed with suspicion. Ships themselves were clever compromises, sturdy enough to survive waves yet fragile when faced with prolonged uncertainty. Food, water, and morale formed an invisible cargo when that mattered as much as maps or compasses. Our voyage takes shape in this world of half-knowledge, where confidence often wore the mask of faith, and calculations leaned on hope as much as mathematics. The person leading this expedition believed firmly in an idea others dismissed, not because proof was overwhelming, but because imagination filled the gaps. Persuasion mattered as much as navigation, since convincing others to fund the plan required turning uncertainty into opportunity. Promises were made with careful words, because success might bring glory, while failure would likely be forgotten or blamed on the sea. For the crew, agreement did not always mean belief, as employment often outweighed conviction. Life aboard ship followed rhythms that felt endless as days blended together under sun and wind. Tasks repeated constantly because survival depended on routine when landmarks disappeared. The ocean offered beauty and threat simultaneously, rewarding attention while punishing carelessness. As land vanished behind them, anxiety grew quietly because distance made turning back harder with every passing hour. The horizon remained stubbornly empty, testing patience and authority alike. Leadership required calm even when certainty thinned. Sailors watched the sky closely, since stars provided direction when compasses alone felt insufficient. Stories circulated on deck, mixing fear with hope, because imagination needed somewhere to go when scenery did not change, time stretched, altering how risk felt. This early phase of the voyage was not heroic in the loud sense, but deeply human, filled with waiting, doubt, and careful observation. Confidence had to be maintained, even when reassurance sounded thinner each day. Belief became a shared project. Systems aboard the ship enforced order because hierarchy prevented chaos in confined space. Obedience mattered more when escape was impossible. Rules kept fear manageable. Meanwhile, expectations back home grew larger than reality because distance allowed success to be imagined freely. Stories would later simplify what felt complex in the moment. History often smooths uncertainty. The sea itself shaped decisions as currents nudged ships along unseen paths, reminding humans that control was partial at best. Nature participated in the voyage, not as a background, but as an active presence. Partnership replaced dominance. As days passed without familiar signs, whispers of concern increased because limits approached not physically but emotionally. Authority faced quiet testing, unity required effort. Yet curiosity persisted because the promise of something unseen continued pulling minds forward. Possibility competed with fear in equal measure. Motion continued. This phase of the journey laid the foundation for everything that followed because choices made early constrained later outcomes. Momentum carried consequences, direction mattered. We pause here, still at sea, where expectation has not yet met reality, and where the world remains unchanged, at least on the maps everyone still carries in their minds. As uncertainty thickened, small signs began to feel enormous because drifting birds, floating plants, and subtle changes in water color hinted at proximity to something unnamed, and those hints fed both excitement and suspicion among weary sailors. Authority now depended less on promises and more on interpretation, since every natural detail became evidence supporting belief or doubt, and leaders learned quickly how fragile confidence could be when stretched across endless water. Days that once felt identical slowly shifted in tone, because anticipation sharpened attention and made even the wind seem deliberate, as though the ocean itself were preparing an answer. When land finally appeared as a thin shadow on the horizon, disbelief arrived first, since eyes trained by monotony struggled to trust sudden difference, and relief arrived only after repeated confirmation. The first encounter with unfamiliar shores carried, rather than celebration, because wonder mixed with caution, and no one yet understood what discovery would demand in return. Stepping onto unknown ground forced minds to recalibrate, since the old maps no longer explained surroundings, and certainty gave way to observation. Plants, animals, and colors appeared both familiar and strange, reinforcing the idea that the world was larger, richer, and less obedient to expectation than previously assumed. Communication with local inhabitants required gesture and patience because language failed immediately and meaning had to be negotiated slowly through shared curiosity. Power dynamics felt unclear, as technology suggested advantage while numbers and environment hinted otherwise, creating a delicate balance neither side fully controlled. Exchange began cautiously because trust developed not through treaties but through repeated small interactions observed closely by everyone present. Every object encountered gained symbolic weight, since proof of discovery needed tangible form to survive the return journey. Decisions made here would ripple outward, influencing how future travelers imagined distant lands and the people living there. The realization that the voyage had not reached its intended destination created tension because success and failure suddenly depended on perspective rather than location. Leaders framed outcomes carefully, emphasizing achievement while quietly adjusting original claims to fit reality. The crew measured success differently, valuing survival and pay over philosophical implications that would only emerge later. Time pressed forward, requiring departure before understanding fully settled, and unfinished questions lingered on shore. The return journey transformed experience into narrative as memory began shaping events into something coherent and communicable. At sea once more, reflection replaced anticipation because discovery no longer waited ahead but followed behind. Stories formed collaboratively, with repetition smoothing contradictions and emphasizing moments that supported shared pride. Distance amplified meaning, since separation allowed imagination to enlarge significance beyond immediate detail. Survival itself became evidence of importance, reinforcing belief that endurance equaled destiny. The ocean, once obstacle, now appeared as pathway because its vastness no longer discouraged movement. Arrival back home disrupted familiar rhythms as news traveled faster than understanding and rumors raced ahead of facts. Audiences received the story selectively, hearing what confirmed hopes while overlooking complications. Objects from the voyage became anchors for belief, providing visible confirmation that words alone could not sustain. Institutions quickly interpreted results through existing frameworks of power, religion, and commerce. Discovery became resource. The voyage altered maps gradually because acceptance required consensus, and consensus required repetition. Knowledge expanded unevenly, spreading through storytellers, merchants, and scholars at different speeds. Children learned a different world than their parents imagined because boundaries had shifted quietly. Trade followed curiosity, and curiosity followed profit, intertwining motives inseparably. Consequences multiplied beyond intent, systems adapted, as navigation improved and ambition recalibrated expectations of distance and possibility. Risk felt more manageable once proven survivable, encouraging repetition of once unthinkable attempts. The idea of the unknown changed character, transforming from fearsome void into challenge. Exploration gained momentum not through bravery alone, but through normalization, Repetition dulled astonishment. Not all outcomes were hopeful because contact carried imbalance, misunderstanding, and exploitation. The same voyage that expanded horizons also narrowed choices for others, introducing forces they did not invite. History absorbed these contradictions without resolving them. Celebration and consequence advanced together, inseparable and enduring. The world grew connected through unequal threads. Over time, this single journey became symbol rather than event, representing possibility more than process. Simplification made the story portable, allowing it to travel further than ships ever could. What mattered was no longer the exact route, but the shift in imagination it caused. Boundaries on paper dissolved, certainty about limits faded. We look back now not to praise courage blindly, but to recognize complexity. Change rarely arrives cleanly. Progress carries shadows. The voyage mattered because it altered assumptions. Thought followed movement. For curious minds, the legacy lives in questions rather than answers, since exploration teaches uncertainty as much as knowledge. The sea remains vast, but smaller in fear. The world remains large, but reachable. Discovery continues as pattern. Each generation inherits both the map and the mistakes, learning navigation alongside responsibility. Wonder survives when paired with humility. Stories endure when told with care. The journey never truly ends. Even now, when horizons feel mapped and measured, curiosity repeats the old question quietly: what lies beyond comfort? What price accompanies knowing? History listens. This voyage opened a door that never closed because movement replaced stillness as the human default. The world became dynamic, thought followed trade. Imagination gained direction. We remain aboard that ship metaphorically, leaning forward whenever the known grows too familiar. Discovery lives in restlessness. Caution tempers enthusiasm, memory shapes choice. The ocean between certainty and curiosity still exists, wide and demanding, inviting attention rather than conquest. We navigate it daily, and like those sailors once did, we continue forward without fully seeing what waits just beyond the horizon.